Hi folks, and welcome to my primer on infographics. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about what an infographic is and give you 8 pointers on how to create an effective and good infographic. So let's get started. First of all, let me pull up my presentation here. And the first thing to talk about is what is an infographic? So on the most simple level, an infographic is basically just a visual representation of information. Now that can either be numerical information or it can be other kinds of information. For example, we can do a map. So as you can see here, this is showing wildfires in California, and it's showing how the fires progressed and spread through California. Or this map, which is interactive and allows you to look at the spread of the coronavirus through the world. We can do per capita. Or this map, which is also interactive and allows you to drill down and see different aspects of how the 2018 elections turned out. And then you can drill down into the details of the information here. Or this one, which is also a map, but it combines a map with a timeline. So this is an interactive map with a slider timeline from 1880 to 2000 showing immigration in the United States. So for example, if I wanted to see something about how the immigration from Mexico has changed over the years, I can select Mexico on here, and then this is where it was in 1950. You can see that it was mostly centered here. And then moving on, this is 1960. This is through the 70s. So you can see how it was sort of growing. And it grows quite a bit in 1980. And then you can see how it expands over the years. So, or you could do it with, say, the Filipino community. You know, so there's really not much data at all until you start getting into the 80s and 90s and 2000. So as they've developed all these online interactive maps, a lot of them can get pretty sophisticated. This is one about the mutation of the coronavirus, and it's a variation on infographics, but you can see the way it's using graphics or visual aids to illustrate information in a pretty sophisticated, slick way. So infographics have come quite a long distance, and we're seeing quite a few very interesting examples of infographics during this whole coronavirus outbreak. For example, this one, which is about how the coronavirus spreads and whether 6 feet really makes sense in terms of social distancing. So this allows me to look at, this is a cough. and this is, I think, 6 feet away. So they say stand 6 feet, but if you're standing 6 feet, this is what you're getting in terms of vapors from the cough. So that's kind of the level of sophistication they're at. But for you guys, for you to develop one in this class, you can really just do, infographics range from something this sophisticated to something really this simple. As you can see, this just shows in a much more simple and static way the risks of spreading the coronavirus. So they, the sophistication of these things can really range, but we don't have to develop something like this. This primer will be about developing something more along the lines of this. So, so that's one thing to keep in mind, is that that in terms of just understanding what they are, the coronavirus, infographics can range. That at root, they're basically just a visual representation of information, and what they actually are can range from something as simple as a pie chart or a bar graph to anything like a map or a timeline or these sophisticated animations. Another thing to keep in mind about an infographic is two aspects of what they do. One is that by visualizing information, they simplify information. So you worked on this when you were working on your graphic design assignments. How do you simplify your layout? How do you take out all the clutter and make it really boil it down to the necessities or the most important things? That's always a crucial challenge in developing any kind of visual communication. And one thing I think to keep in mind about that is that what you really want to do is simplify in terms of emphasizing the meaningful information. So you want to identify what's most meaningful that you're trying to communicate, and what's less meaningful or less important, and try and eliminate that. And secondly, infographics allow you to basically be able to see what you can't see with the naked eye. So what do I mean by that exactly? Well, let me go to screen share again. So this infographic, for example, is about the Notre Dame fire. And you can see it shows you where it starts, and then kind of a blow-by-blow, 5 minutes after the alarm, what kind of happened, the manager called back. So it illustrates the story of how this worked by giving you a cutaway of the building. So you can actually see, you see an outline, the outside of the building, but it's a cutaway. So it allows you to see what you wouldn't be able to see with the naked eye. Or, for example, this one about the oil and gas blowout. The Deepwater Horizon disaster, which happened in the Gulf of Mexico, when this offshore oil rig that drilled deep down into the ocean had called a blowout, like a huge leak that happened on April 20th, and just kept spewing gallons of oil until they were finally able to stop the leak of the oil. It started in April 20th of 2010, and they weren't able to finally declare it sealed until September of 2010, and it leaked 5 million gallons of oil. This is a cutaway of the actual mechanism of the drill, and it you know, it illustrates why they weren't able to kind of shut it down and what they were trying to do. So again, that's an infographic enabling you to see what you can't see with the naked eye. So, okay, so that's the basics of what an infographic is. And now let's talk about some tips for how to create your own, because I'm asking you guys for your assignment to gather hard information like data and facts, and then to think about what kind of a infographic could I create for my presentation that would best illustrate some aspect of the information I'm providing. And so to that end, I've given you a Word document with a bunch of links to websites that'll enable you to create an infographic. But let's talk about some pointers about how to create a solid one. So let me pull back up my PowerPoint again. And get to my pointers. 8 tips for creating good infographics. So one thing you don't want to do, as I talked about at the beginning, is to let it fill up with clutter and make it too complicated, because that defeats the whole purpose of an infographic. So as you can see, a site like this just is very difficult to read. It's hard to understand what it's trying to communicate. This, on the other hand, could be more elegant. I mean, the student, I suppose, could have done a better job with the design or the sort of artsy side of it, but it's effective at communicating its message. So this student created a shoe company, or came up with the idea for one, and then created an infographic to illustrate what that shoe company would do. So it's pretty straightforward, right? A second point that's closely related to that is make sure that your infographic is clear. So sometimes it's not just clutter that makes it unclear. Sometimes it's that you haven't really fully developed the idea very well, the concept very well. This student had the idea of using like a kind of the front of a stereo to illustrate his idea for creating a company that would, I guess, help out bands, like local music bands. But it's really unclear what he's trying to show in this. I mean, he's got 2 tone buttons here. Should one of them be volume and one of them be tone? And then if you call them tone and volume, does that fit with the whole concept here of people in a band, or why they're in a band or why they're not in a band? I guess these 2 pie charts are related. This sort of shows who's in a band and who's not, and this shows their reasons for this not being in a band, but it's not very clear, is it? And it takes a while to figure out, and it's not really clear why there are these 2 tone knobs here. This student, on the other hand, I thought had a concept that worked pretty well. Basically, their idea was to create a company that matches athletic recruits with coaches at different universities. And so they had the idea of setting it up like a Tinder app. And so they created an infographic that makes it look like a Tinder app where you're pairing athletes and coaches. Okay, so the next concept I wanted to get to was the idea of just, again, this has to do with simplicity in a way, but how do you boil it down into a single concept or a single image? And this example I'm showing you is from a movie poster made by Saul Bass, who's really one of the pioneering individuals in graphic design. And Saul Bass started out making movie posters, and what he recalls in different interviews is that when he got into the business, people would try and cram the whole story of the movie onto a poster to somehow make the poster illustrate blow by blow what happens in the movie through maybe different picture panels or whatever. And so he really worked at, how do I create a single strong image that communicates really the whole storyline or the whole concept of the movie. So this is Vertigo, which is a thriller that has to do with a guy who has this fear of heights, and the image kind of communicates the fear and the nausea and the dizziness of vertigo. And then another thing to think about, and again, all of these ideas are very tied together, is, you know, what concepts do you use to communicate that clearly? So, I mean, if we go back, you know, basically in a different way saying the same thing that I was trying to bring up here when I was saying, you know, think through your concept, think through your ideas. How can you take the facts that you want to present and develop visual ideas that help you communicate that? And so this person, you know, the people who created this wanted to say, hey, we're going to teach a course on reading. So they came up with making the connection with the idea of the sleuth who has the magnifying glass. And then these last couple of ideas really have to do with the principles of graphic design that you learned a few weeks ago in the graphic design assignment. So one of those ideas, I don't know if you remember the 4 principles of graphic design, they are balance, contrast, rhythm, and unity. So I'm going to emphasize 2 here. One is balance. Make sure that you know, the different things that you put on the page work together in a way that doesn't make it lopsided. And the second is work on rhythm. So you can see that there's an issue of kind of balance and rhythm, what we're calling rhythm here. If you know, think about rhythm in terms of taking the eyes of the reader and guiding them through your design. So when my eyes fall on this, I'm not really sure where I'm supposed to go. There's no real flow to it. I mean, it sort of goes here and then here. It's just not really very good flow. So compare that kind of flow to this. Notice that the student who designed this infographic clearly brings you all the way from the, you clearly start at the top and your eyes follow all the way down to the bottom of the page. And then finally, think about a headline that's going to be effective. So the 2 things you want to think about for the headline is, you know, what can I do for a headline that's going to, on the one hand, tell people what it's about, and on the other hand, bring them in or draw them into my design. So what's going to be kind of a sexy or interesting headline that's going to pique their interest. And then finally, actually it said finally on the last slide, but this is really finally, cite your sources. So your infographic is only going to be as good as the quality of the information that you present. We could have a whole other conversation, which maybe I'll create as a separate video, on making sure that you represent data or facts accurately and in a way that, you know, helps people understand them better. But a very important part of that is to make sure that you cite where your sources come from, that you use good sources, and that you're clear with everybody about where those sources are coming from, so that, you know, that's just the basic concept of transparency that you should have learned in the News Literacy Journalism 150 class, that you want to present it in such a way that people can go back and see for themselves whether the data is really true or not. And that's pretty much my whole presentation. I hope that was helpful. I encourage you to give me feedback and ask me any questions about it, and you know, talk to me about what ideas you have in mind for your infographic. Let's take this one step at a time, and good luck.